I am using a pattern by Sarah Sews Stuff on Tumblr. She provided this pattern absolutely free, so if you want to make one for yourself, I'll put a link to her Tumblr in the description. Now, she actually suggested printing her pattern right onto some fusible interfacing, which I had never heard of before, and I would have liked to try it, but we are in the middle of a pandemic right now, so I just had to use what I had on hand, meaning that I had to painstakingly trace every single one of the 40 or 50 pattern pieces by hand onto the interfacing that I did have, and then add a 1/4 inch seam allowance around every single piece. This is what took the longest out of anything, so if you have the option to use your printer, I would definitely recommend doing that. Then I had to cut them all out, which thanks to the magic of editing, you do not have to experience. When I ironed my pieces, I did one section at a time, and I did each piece individually, and I laid them out in order of where they were going to be sewn on my table, and this way I made sure that no two colors or patterns were going to end up being sewn right next to each other. It took a little bit of extra time, but I think it's worth it. I feel like everyone has that little hoard of cotton scraps that are too small to use for anything but too big to throw away. Well, that's exactly what you need for this project. Now it is time to actually sew all of these pieces together. And I found out the hard way that it's really easy to mix up the direction of these pieces, and I actually ended up sewing a few of the triangular ones on upside down or sideways. So just be really careful if you're making this that you don't do that. I think the number one tip that anyone can learn in sewing is to iron everything. Iron all the time. If you're not sure if you need to iron it. Because ironing is the one thing that will take your project from looking homemade to professional. Ironing is so important. So now I'm going to actually cut out my pattern and use it as is to cut out my quilt batting. I'm not going to add any seam allowance to this. And then I'm going to trace it onto some plain cotton that I have lying around, and then add seam allowance to that one and cut that out for the lining. The batting is what gives a quilt its quilty quality and makes it look kind of puffy and enhances where the stitches are. So I pinned my quilt batting so that it wasn't going to move around while I sewed, and then I sewed in the quilting lines, and I just used the edge of my foot as a guide for this part just to make it easy. The act of quilting and actually sewing in the top stitching like this has two purposes in this instance. So not only is it holding down the seam allowance that we ironed flat, but it's also holding down the quilt batting, and it's going to keep it from moving around in between your outer shell and your lining, and it also looks super cute. Once all the pieces are cut out, I finally get to sew them together. Sarah Sews Stuff is seriously an angel for providing this pattern for free. It's so fun to put together. It's just a really fun, quarantine project that can bring you a little bit of joy because it's just a silly quilted plague doctor mask. I made this for a friend, and it was just a really fun thing to do on a weekend. It took me about 7 hours, start to finish, and her instructions and her tutorial are so easy to follow. I really recommend that if you're looking for something fun to do while you're stuck at home and you have a bunch of quilting cotton and some free time, make this. Before I sew up the bottom seam of my mask, I'm going to top stitch flat all of the seams that I just sewed. If you are lazy like me and you don't iron your seams flat or pin them flat, you're going to have to keep flipping your fabric up to make sure that the seam allowance is indeed laying flat and not getting all bunched up as it likes to do. So before I sew in the lining, I just threw together a really quick strap out of one of the cottons that I used for the quilting. Okay, so I'm getting really close to the end. I have my strap, my quilted outside piece, and my lining, and all I have to do is sew them together. This is basically done by just sliding the lining right over top of your quilted part, pinning around the edge, and sewing. I left a 4-inch gap down at the bottom so that I could flip it right side out, and then I just top stitched that together afterwards. You have to pin your straps in place before you do this, but you can sew it all together at the same time. And this is where we're at. It looks a little bit soulless without the eyes, but we're gonna fix that right now. The thing that makes this the ideal quarantine project is that you can really make it from things you have already in your house. If you sew or you craft on the regular, you probably have enough things to get this done with a little bit of creativity. In this case, I had some leftover plastic curtain rings and some clear vinyl and holographic foil that I was able to combine into the elements I needed for the lens. At this point, I started to get really impatient, and so I just hot glued this part together. And now you are ready to serve up some quarantine looks. Keep in mind, this ensemble won't really be complete unless your roots are at least 2 inches grown out from not being able to have left the house to see your hairdresser. But, you know, if you don't have that part, it's fine. People will still get it. So there we go, a super fun, easy weekend project that you can do in quarantine and have a fun little thing at the end so that you can be quarantine kawaii. I'm sorry I had to say it, I couldn't help myself, that's just who I am. Thank you so much for watching my fun little sew with me video. I really enjoy making these and I think they're really fun. I have my username on Instagram here on the end card if you want to see more of the things that I've made. And of course, once again, I will be putting the link to this amazing, completely free pattern in the video description. Thanks for watching.